We've all heard of the free will paradox, that if an all-knowing God exists, can our choices ever truly be free? It's a thought experiment, but what if I told you that anime gave us the perfect, terrifying answer, but not as a theory, as a character? A woman so serene, so absolute in her control, that she doesn't just predict your choices, she designs the menu. She is the living, breathing argument that free will is a comforting story we tell ourselves, a lie that makes the cage feel spacious. Chainsaw Man is not a story about defeating the control devil. It is an autopsy of control itself, and Makima is the perfect subject. She does not crave power in the childish, demonic way we understand it. She craves equilibrium, a world without pain, without suffering, without disorder, a world of perfect, silent peace. And here is the first great heresy of her character. Her heaven is our hell, because her perfect world requires the annihilation of the unpredictable human heart. It requires the end of free will. But to understand the depth of her trap, we must first understand the three-layer facade she operates behind. She's not just lying to Denji, she is lying to reality itself. Makima's control is not a blunt instrument. It is a doctrine appealing to the three fundamental pillars of human submission. The first pillar being the parental layer, the lie of nurture. From her first appearance, Makima positions herself as Denji's salvation from the feral, base existence he knew. She gives him food, shelter, purpose, and affection, things a parent provides. But this is conditional love weaponized. Her care is a grooming process. She's creating a dependency, not fostering growth. Every reward is a calibration, moving him closer to the ideal tool. She uses the language of family. Let's make a contract, you're my dog, to frame enslavement as belonging. This is the parental God, the omnipotent caregiver whose will must be obeyed for your own good, whose disappointment is the greatest punishment. She exploits the most basic human need, to be chosen, to be cared for. And then the second layer, the statistic layer, the bureaucracy of fate. Makima does not operate through a chaotic evil. She operates through contracts, hierarchies, and plans. She is a perfect bureaucrat. Her power, treating those she deems inferior as literal possessions, is the ultimate extension of a system that sees individuals as data points, resources to be allocated. She is the state that drafts its citizens, the corporation that owns its employees. Her control is clean, efficient, and legally binding. This layer appeals to our desire for order, for a world that makes sense, where someone is in control of the chaos. She sells the security of totalitarianism as a public service. And then the third layer, the divine layer, the predestination of the saved and the damned. This is where the religious symbolism becomes terrifyingly explicit. Makima's powers function on a theological hierarchy. She views herself and Chainsaw Man as the only true persons in a world of objects. Everyone else, Aki, Power, the random citizens of Tokyo, are not people. They're angels and demons in cosmology only she sees. To be summoned, commanded, and discarded to fulfill her divine will. Their deaths are not tragedies. They are ritual sacrifices, necessary steps in her communion with her God, Chainsaw Man. Makima's entire cosmology, her divine hierarchy, was logically flawless. To control everything, we must see everything as either a tool to be used or a goal to be consumed. It is the ultimate materialist philosophy. There is no soul, only utility, no love, only transaction. And for nearly the entire story, it works. But her system had one blind spot, one variable her godlike calculus could not and would not account for. Genuine, irrational, transactional human connection. Makima saw power as a tool, a blood fiend to be used as a leash on Denji, and finally, as a sacrificial lamb to break his spirit. But Denji and Power did not have a transaction, they had a friendship. A messy, violent, profoundly stupid friendship built on shared trauma, bad baths, and the simple animal comfort of not being alone. They were, in the truest sense, a pack. When Makima destroyed Power, She wasn't just removing a tool, she was desecrating a bond her philosophy had no category for. She assumed Denji's grief would make him pliable, but directed rage into her pre-designed channel against the gun devil. Instead, it planted a seed of pure personal hatred, a human emotion, not a devil's instinct that her control could not weed out. This is perhaps the most brilliant, subtle heresy in the story. Makima's entire goal is to use Chainsaw Man to erase bad concepts from the world. And there, in the dark, she shares a bad movie with him, a piece of art she finds worthless, but Denji loves it. In that moment, she's not sharing a human experience. She is instead conducting a field test. She is trying to simulate intimacy to see if the stimulus produces the desired devotion in her subject. It's a sacrament without faith, a ritual without a soul. Denji's love for that bad movie becomes a symbol of everything Makima wants to erase: flawed taste, imperfect joy, subjective meaning. It is the antithesis of her sterile paradise. Her failure to understand why he loves it is the failure of a god to comprehend why its creation cherishes their dusty, chaotic world. Makima offers Denji a distorted version of everything he wants: touch, praise, purpose, but she always frames it as a master rewarding a pet. This is the core of her control, keeping him in a state of grateful subjugation. Denji's ultimate subconscious rebellion is not his desire for her, but his desire for her as an equal. He doesn't just want to be with the control devil. He fantasizes about a world where she's just a girl and he is just a boy. This is the only thing Makima cannot give, cannot fake, and cannot comprehend. To be equal is to be outside of control. It is the one request her system must reject to survive. Makima's ultimate defeat is not a battle of power, it is the failure of narrative. Denji defeats her by weaponizing her own worldview against her. He tells her he loves her more than anyone. He offers to become her dog, to consume her, to make her a part of him forever. She speaks the language of consumption and control she understands. He presents it as the ultimate transaction, her existence for his devotion. And in that moment, the control devil, who saw all human relationships as transactions, is faced with an offer she cannot refuse because it validates her entire philosophy. She lets her guard down. She believes, finally, that she has won, that she has reduced the chaotic human heart to a predictable contract. But the transaction was a lie. Denji didn't love her. He hated her. He was using her own language of control to enact a purely human, emotional revenge for power, for Aki, for himself. He used the devil's contract to deliver a human judgment. In the end, the system of control was destroyed, not by a greater system, but by a better liar. One whose lie was powered, not by logic, but by grief, love, and a feral will to be free. He doesn't become a god, he becomes a boy, having a meal, finally free of the hand on his head. The goddess was consumed not in a blaze of glory, but in an act of mundane, terrible humanity. But the story doesn't end with freedom, it ends with a new contract. In our conclusion, we ask the hardest question: when you defeat a god of control, do you win your freedom? Or do you simply become the new designer of the cage? So, the control devil is dead, the goddess is slain, consumed by the very human chaos she sought to erase. Denji is free. But is he? This is where Fujimoto's genius becomes truly unsettling. He doesn't give us a clean victory. Instead, he gives us a theoretical aftermath. We are left not with an answer, but with a deeper, more insidious question about the nature of freedom itself. Denji did not defeat Makima with a purer ideology or a better system. Instead, he defeated her by becoming her for a single crucial moment. He used a lie, a contract of devotion, to enact his will. He employed manipulation to defeat the manipulator. He won by speaking the devil's language. This is the unavoidable hangover of killing a god of control. You get your hands dirty with her methods. Denji's freedom is born from an act of supreme, intimate control, consuming another being to nullify their will. Has he escaped the cycle, or simply internalized it? The victory is real, yes, but it is philosophically messy. It suggests that in a world built on contracts and consumption, even the act of liberation is kind of a deal with the devil. And then, we have the final haunting post-credit scene from the manga. This is the ultimate twist of the knife. You cannot eradicate the concept of control, just as you cannot eradicate fear or violence. It will always reincarnate. The question is not how to kill it, but how to live with it. Denji now faces Makima's original paradox from the other side. He has power over the control devil. Will he become the benevolent god she pretended to be? Will he try to raise Naruto with love and equality he craved, attempt to redefine control as care? Or will the corrupting nature of the power and his own damned psyche simply create a new, perhaps gentler, but still absolute cage? Denji is no longer the dog. He is now holding the leash. The test is whether he can drop it. So, was Makima right? Is free will a lie? Makima's fatal flaw was her belief that because she could predict and manipulate desire itself was meaningless. She saw the strengths and thought there was no puppet. But Fujimoto argues the opposite through Denji's journey. Free will is not the absence of influence, or trauma, or hunger, or of a system. It is the chaotic, beautiful, and terrible process of making choices within that storm. It is Denji, shaped by poverty, manipulated by women, grieving his friends, still choosing to save a cat. It is the assertion of a self in the face of a universe that tries to define you as a tool, a consumer, or a devil. Makima's world, a world without the bad concepts of pain and death, would also be a world without the choices that gave life meaning. No risk, no sacrifice, no love that costs you something. Her paradise is a world where free will is not just a lie, but an obsolete concept, a silent, peaceful hell. Makima is the lie of free will made flesh. The promise that if you surrender your messy, painful choices to a higher power, you will find peace. Denji is the truth of free will made flesh. The bloody, hungry, grieving, and loving proof that meaning is not given. It is built. One bad movie, one loyal friend, one act of revenge, and one save the cat at a time. The cage was never the world Makima wanted to build. The cage was the belief that we are not strong enough to bear the terrifying responsibilities of our own choices. The chainsaw didn't devour the lie of free will. It just cut a hole in the wall of the cage, big enough for one boy to squeeze through, into a world that is still terrifying, painful, but profoundly his own. We began with a paradox, a goddess who saw our freedom as a design flaw in a universe she wished to be perfect. We end with a boy, sitting in the quiet after the storm, not with answers, but with scars. Makima's grand thesis was that free will is the root of all suffering. Remove choice, remove pain, create a world of perfect, silent harmony. It is the oldest theological promise, wrapped in the skin of a beautiful woman. Chainsaw Man does not argue that free will is an absolute supernatural gift. It is something far more mundane and far more radical. Free will is not a state of being, it is an action. It is the act of cutting. It is the chainsaw's roar in the face of the silent cage. It is Denji, with every instinct and trauma screaming at him to be a good dog, choosing instead to be a bad owner. It is choosing revenge over obedience, grief over numbness, a real connection with a blood fiend over a simulated affection from a goddess. His will is not free from influence. It is forged in the fire of it. His freedom is not pristine. It is earned, tooth and nail, with a weapon made for destruction. Makima offered a world without bad movies. Denji's victory is the right to love them, to find meaning, not in a preordained paradise, but in the messy, subjective, deeply personal act of choosing what you love and fighting for it, even if, especially if, it's something a god could call trash. So, if you took one thing from Makima's story, let it be this: the most dangerous lie is not that free will doesn't exist. The most dangerous lie is that you wouldn't want it, even if you knew the cost. Makima was the end of pain. Benji is the beginning of meaning. And in that beginning, in the hunger, the grief, the love for terrible things, lies only freedom that matters. The freedom to be gloriously and terribly a self that can choose, a self that can love, a self that can, when necessary, rev the engine and cut the world down to a size it can finally hold in its own two bloody hands. Instead, the chainsaw is not a weapon, it is a key, and the cage was never locked.